everything you need and more. And that's where this comes in at SportsGrid, at SportsGrid TV. Just a reminder, those are our social media handles. Those that have lapsed, those that are new to the show. A lot of information coming up in this show. It'll live there forever, but you better jump on it because there are others. And speaking of the others, the leader of the others, Joe Pisapia, my man, as we get closer and closer to baseball, I get more and more excited about our talks. And then things happen in football, and I'm like, I get to sit down with Joe. And here we are. What's up, my man? Happy?
Yes, we've got it all for you today. Hour 2, we're going to talk a little NFL free agency because what a week it was. Very interesting week, too. Sometimes we sit around and we're waiting, or like that meme with the guy with the stick who's poking, the NFL saying, come on, do something. Sometimes with free agency, it feels a lot like that. But not this week, especially from a fantasy perspective. So many weapons, so many running backs changing address, quarterbacks changing address. We're going to get to all of that. The Fields news that dropped yesterday, but also Cousins on the move. But as you mentioned, Matt, we are in the thick of fantasy baseball season, fantasy baseball preparation, draft season. It's all right here for you. And we, of course, have you covered. But, of course, we got to get to the news first and foremost. And I wish we had better news to start with, but it's Garrett Cole, unfortunately. Could miss 1 to 2 months. They're going to try some other therapies to avoid Tommy John. Color me pessimistic. Matt Striker, if you look at the big board right now, the Yankees are still plus 150 to win that division. They're still the favorites in the American League East. If they don't have Garrett Cole, I mean, I think you can kiss that goodbye. I do not see this. It is the 17th now, by the way. Happy St. Patrick's Day to all of you who celebrate. We still don't have Blake Snell. We don't have Jordan Montgomery. I've heard from some folks here on the inside of things that Montgomery and the Yankees is never going to happen. There's some bad blood there with how things ended. And Blake Snell, again, we're still waiting on any news from him, but it's already the 17th of March. So you got to imagine these guys would take about a month to ramp up at some point. So don't expect any of those guys in April, no matter where they're pitching. But the Garrett Cole news is the biggest news. And Matt, I know I'm being pessimistic here, but the Yankees are in a bad spot because not only are they waiting on Garrett Cole, if he doesn't get the surgery in 2 months, 3 months, he could miss most of next year too. And I understand they're all in with Soto. I get it. They're trying their best to get him through there, but I don't think you can look for Garrett Cole right now. I dropped him to 50th in my starting pitcher ranks, and I even think that might be not far enough. I'm not sure where you have him in your head, but are you somebody that's taking even that sort of a discount on Garrett Cole in drafts that are going on this weekend?
So here's my thing. You know me. You know I'm mild-mannered. At most, I'm very calm waters. But there's something brewing here just from the way we are in sports, the way this organization has been handled, the fact that there is now a cloud over the season before the season has even started. The question you have to ask yourself from our fantasy and our wagering perspectives, can the Yankees stay afloat until June? Do they have the ability to do that? What does the team look like also without, say, Aaron Judge's bat in there? Now you start to picture dark, gray, dreary Bronx days. Think mid-'80s Yankees, if you will, and nobody wants that. Something has to change within the regime. Let me just put that out there. I'm not going to pound my fist and scream and yell, but the way things have been handled over the last few seasons has become apparent. Something needs to change. The personnel at the top needs to change. How can you go into a baseball season as the now second most lucrative team in the sport and come in under a cloud where your odds are being chipped away each and every day before the season starts? It should be the other way around. The Yankees should be the Dodgers, and they're not. And they haven't been in nearly 40 some odd years. What did Reggie do? Hit 3 home runs? Was that 77, something like that? Tell me again. That's where this whole thing can start, Joe. I can write a book. But to me, the Yankees got to stay alive until June. Where do you shop? Well, now if you're in the middle of say you have the 7th pick of the first round, Joe, you're not taking Garrett Cole. Corbin Burns, Spencer Strider. Where are you going for your SP1 now? That's the question. Dylan Cease? Is Dylan Cease a 1 now in that park?
I don't know if he's a 1 now in this park, but that's the news also that came down this week. Dylan Cease traded from the White Sox to the Padres. So they gave up Drew Thorpe in this deal, which is not a small piece. Thorpe has been really good this spring. Young pitcher, throws really hard. So this was a piece here that's going the other direction as the White Sox continue to rebuild. But that's another name off the board that the Yankees could have gone after. And I don't know what kind of draft capital they really have left that they want to move in terms of, prospects. But for me right now, again, looking at Garrett Cole's ADP, going back to that, the Garrett Cole ADP is just not far enough. I mean, it's got to go well into the Eovaldi, Eduardo Rodriguez stage. Even then, I think I'd rather take those guys. Again, these are guys going around the 50 mark. I'd rather take Imanaga and see what I get out of him, because the danger of looming of him missing an entire season is just too much for my fantasy team to bear. And this is also why, it's fun to do best ball drafts. It's fun to do early drafts. But if you are making serious investments in fantasy baseball, wait as long as you can. Get to that last week of spring training where everybody shuts it down, and then start doing your drafts. And I think that's the best practice, because you just never know with these guys is one moment. The Dylan Cease trade, again, this is a guy that's, striking out 200 guys per year. The ERA is still a little high. The whip could be a little high at times. The strikeout rate is not the problem. I had Eno Saris on my show, the pitching guru, earlier this week, and he was actually very bullish on not just Dylan Cease, but actually this move as well, moving to the Padres, a better offense, a better defensive team. So it's a good setup for him there. But again, Dylan Cease has to find a little bit more consistency. The one thing you can say about Dylan Cease, we'll get to it later, is he has been consistent. That is a good thing. You know what you're getting, and the durability has been very good too. Some other news and notes. Ronald Acuna, good news, back in the lineup for the Braves. We've been monitoring this one for weeks now. Acuna is back in action. All systems go, so we can all breathe a sigh of relief there. But Devin Williams, this is the bad news again. It's like a bad news sandwich here today to start the show. Devin Williams is going to be missing a few weeks here. 2 stress fractures, missing about 8 weeks, possibly even more, with those back issues that are going to be lingering. So, Matt, where do the Brewers go here with closing duties as they wait for Devin Williams to get right? Because this is a huge loss.
You're going to see names like Joel Payamps and Abner Uribe probably moving up a lot of boards. I would just wait. And again, we're not chasing saves. We've learned that. If you're not going to grab some of those first 5 solid closers somewhere in your draft where you're comfortable, then don't speculate. But those are the names I'm seeing moving up boards, Payamps and Uribe, Joe.
Yeah. When we come back here after this first break, we're going to take a look at some sleepers. And oftentimes on the show, we talk about sleepers and what that means. And a lot of times there are these young players who either are just coming up or players who are about to break out, who give you a little piece of last year. But there's also some names out there that you're going to be very familiar with who are going post 200 ADP. They actually have some really good spots in their respective lineups. They're veterans, they're old hat, they're guys that you're very familiar with. And a lot of people are passing them over. And I thought it was high time to give some of those old farts a little bit of love here on the program. So when we come back, we're going to take a look at some of those names, because some of the numbers might surprise you, the stats might surprise you, but most importantly, where they're hitting in their respective batting orders is almost shocking. We did a whole segment on this earlier in the week on Fantasy Pros MLB, and I wanted to bring it over here for everybody at SportsGrid, because SportsGrid viewers need to understand this as well. So when we come back, it's going to be a list of some veteran bats here that you should be paying attention to that just might win you your league. We return right here on FSP Sunday.
Cinderella run in March Madness, which is what we love out of the NCAA tournament. Indiana State should be in the big dance. I hope the selection committee follows.
Depending on what bracket they end up on, they could really make a strong case to win the national championship. Hence why their odds keep getting shorter, and shorter.
Only on SportsGrid.
Unlike the last one, I don't think these managers are going to sign up for a 1-1 draw. I think the Spurs know they need to win this one. They need the full 3 points to try to get into Champions League position.
But generally speaking, I find Klopp and Liverpool's approach to be much more effective, which is you disrupt those patterns of play, you get in the middle of those triangles, and you put them on the back foot.
Pro League Soccer, powered by Marca. Only on SportsGrid.
I'm sitting in this chair last year talking, everyone's talking about how the Mets have won the offseason and all these signings and all these players are brought in, and then I mean, you have to deal with, injuries like I think I've never seen before.
They're really going to try to upgrade some defensively in the outfield and with Bader. And there's a lot of good things there, but the depth is what's going to be important because not everybody's going to hold up.
Newswire, only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
All right, welcome back into FST Fantasy Sports Today. Matt and Joe with you here, giving you everything you need in order to dominate whichever avenue you choose to make some money this upcoming baseball season. Let's dive into it. This is what we do. Rolling our sleeves up here, it's time for a look at some veteran bench bats, tenured benched bats that often go overlooked. You can find them very late in your drafts, sometimes even free squares later on. So let's start here, and Joe and I were having a conversation in the break about this particular team and their odds to win their league at least. So let's look at Mitch Garver, listed as a catcher and a DH. I think he's going to primarily DH because of the fact that Cal Raleigh's there. And even though Cal Raleigh strikes out and walks quite a bit, he does offer some good pop, as does Mitch Garver. So let's have this conversation, Joe, about Mitch Garver and the Seattle Mariners.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, Matt, because he is going to mostly DH. And guess what? He's hitting cleanup in this batting order right now as we're looking at Fangraphs, the projected lineups. Now, last year was a good season, 19 homers for him. He drove in just 50 runs, but he only played in 87 games, so a little over half a season there. So a guy who can hit 270, a guy who's got power, and as you mentioned, qualifies a catcher. Now, that's a huge key, too. If you're playing in two catcher leagues, Garver is a big win because you don't get a lot of these guys who catch and DH, or at least are catcher eligible and are in the lineup as much as Garver could possibly be in 2024. And I think that is a very important thing. This is a pretty good lineup. I still say they're one big bat away in the middle of this order that I think they will acquire at some point in July at the trade deadline or thereabouts. And I think Seattle at 9-1 is an incredible wager. You know they've got the starting pitching depth. They've got Kirby. They've got Gilbert. They've got Castillo, right? They've got guys like Brian Wu and Bryce Miller. So it's not just how good the rotation is. It's also the depth that's really important. Those are the kind of teams that are going to win 90-plus games, and those are the kind of teams that are going to be in good situations when you come to the playoffs because they have the depth. So even if there is an injury, they don't fold like a house of cards. But Mitch Garver all of a sudden becomes a really intriguing piece, even in single catcher leagues too. If you want to punt catcher and then wait, in terms of where he's going on the board, he's what, like the 14th, 15th catcher off the board? I mean, that's a phenomenal situation there to draft Mitch Garver. And a guy in the middle of the order who's going to be in a good spot with run productivity, a good power bat. As you mentioned, Raleigh's there, Julio Rodriguez is there. They brought in Jorge Polanco. They've got enough here to really compete. And I love the odds, especially with Garrett Cole's future in doubt. Yeah. Look at the Toronto Blue Jays. If Kevin Gausman isn't quite right, same situation the Yankees are in, right? Kind of all falls apart there, and so much pressure goes on the rest of the pieces of these respective rotations. Whereas you look at Seattle and what they've been building here the last couple of years, and I think it's going in the right direction. They're not afraid to make the hard decisions, not afraid to move on with certain players when they need to. But I would say this, Seattle is finally set up for a real run this year. I know last year it was fun. They got in there. Julio was spectacular in the second half, but this is the year where I think Seattle really starts to make a statement. And if they do, Mitch Garver is one of these pieces floating around in a really good lineup that's practically free post 200. So Mitch Garver, the first guy here, qualifies a catcher, valuable in 2-catcher leagues, valuable in just regular leagues and deeper leagues, valuable everywhere, and being undervalued, I think, in the marketplace.
All right. Great job as always. Let's continue the conversation because what we're trying to do here is steer our attention away from the obvious. We're talking about the Yankees and the Dodgers and stuff, trying to find these teams and thus these players that will be able to have a bit of easier waters on our route to profit. Now, here's a guy that I think will primarily slot at third base. He's a switch hitter. He's going to hit between two younger hitters in the middle of a potent lineup. Talking about Jeimer Candelario and the Cincinnati Reds. Joe, I'll let you take it from here. He should hit between McLean and Steer, right smack in the middle of that lineup. Your thoughts?
Once again, another guy hitting cleanup in a good lineup. This is an even better ballpark situation. And the situation's cleared up because in recent weeks, when Noelvi Marte tested positive for PEDs, he's going to miss 80 games. So all of a sudden, that weird roster crunch we were expecting in Cincinnati, where somebody was going to lose at bats, we were talking about maybe Spencer Steer being that guy. Now that's not the case, at least for the first half of the season. So Marte on the shelf there with the suspension. You have to imagine he's probably going to do, some time in the minor leagues when he comes back there. Probably not going straight back unless there are other injuries to the Cincinnati Reds. But you mentioned this lineup. It's very good. It's very deep. Candelario has a great chance to drive in 90 runs if he just stays healthy and stays in that cleanup spot this year. That's huge. And if you look at what Candelario did last year, this is a very solid player. Again, a guy that had a nice rebound season, 22 home runs last year in 140 games, 77 runs, 70 RBI, hit 250. So you like to see the batting average go up a little bit, but still, this is a player now where you see Christian Encarnacion Strand probably playing first base. You'll see Spencer Steer move to the outfield. You'll see McLean at second. Friedel will play in the outfield too, the DH spot, probably getting Jonathan India there. So in a perfect world, I think the Reds would like to keep India until about the trade deadline, move him, get Marte back, and maybe move India for some pitching. That would be the best thing. But regardless, if that's the scenario that presents itself, Candelario should be good in the second 80 games of the year too, even when Marte returns.
Yeah, just a good professional hitter, if you will, and also don't lose sight of what losing Joey Votto's presence does. Candelario kind of mitigates a bit of that, brings the adult in the room, if you will. Speaking of adults in the room, this guy is about to have gray in his red beard, and he's normally overlooked. But looking at the way the lineup shakes out, he should hit in between a player that I think is going to bounce back in a big way in Vlad Guerrero Jr., provided that his hands are healthy, and Dalton Varsho, which is another guy who loses catcher eligibility, just to bring the conversation full circle from the Garver conversation with which we started the segment. Dalton Varsho is going to be really good, I think. So sandwiched in between Vlad and Dalton Varsho sits Justin Turner. Joe, your thoughts?
Justin Turner, a guy who every year is going to hit 275 or better, every year is going to hit 20 home runs, every year is going to miss some time. But again, where is the wear and tear? Where is the downside here? I don't see it. Look at the ADP of this guy, 213 overall for a player who's going to hit 23 bombs, 276. He drove in 96 runs last year. He scored 86 runs for the Boston Red Sox. And this year he is staying in the same division, playing for the Toronto Blue Jays. As you mentioned, sandwiched between two guys that we're very excited about, especially Vlad. Vlad looks great this spring. He's in much better shape. He is hitting Vladdy bombs again. So it looks like he is back on track. Last year, he talked about how he was injured most of the season and played through it. And I think it showed. And he wasn't in the best physical condition. This year, he showed up to camp looking great. And Justin Turner is a perfect veteran bat to drop in the middle here. And I understand you're probably expecting somewhere around 135 games, but you'll take that at a 213 ADP. And if you look at some of the other players that are going around that typical range, it's a lot of unknown pieces. I'll give you, for instance, too. I mean, there's guys who've had a lot of injuries. Justin Turner, 213, or Starling Marte at 214. Marte's a great player, but how much has Marte stayed on the field? Lourdes Gurriel at 219. Yeah, he's a nice player, a very similar profile to Justin Turner, but I guarantee you Gurriel will still go earlier in most drafts. So I'm looking at Turner as another guy hitting cleanup, veteran bat. You know what you're getting, and veterans can help you. It's not just about getting the young guys in redraft. It's about getting the veterans that you can count on week in and week out in your fantasy lineup.
All right, that's great advice as always. Now, I'm finding I've drafted in 3 different drafts. I'm finding that at the end of the day, my second base spot is something that I just, for whatever reason, seems very fluid. This next guy, season over season, always seems to show up on my rosters at some point in the season. This year, he is playing for the Angels, or at least we'll recognize him as such. should be in the middle lineup, but I can see a lineup where he's down a little bit between Ward and Rengifo. I think Adele and Hicks will take at-bats away from Brandon Drury, but your thoughts overall?
Maybe, but just like Justin Turner, who qualifies at multiple positions, right? Turner qualifies at first, second, and third. Drury qualifies in most leagues at first and second. It's a lot of flexibility, especially if you're playing in leagues with middle infield spots, corner infield spots. And I get what you're saying, but Anthony Rendon is slated right now to hit cleanup, and we all know Anthony Rendon's history of playing games. So there's a good chance that you're going to get Brandon Drury hitting cleanup, if not for at least part of the season, maybe all of the season. Drury back-to-back years with 20-plus homers. 83 RBI last year, hit 264. Drury continues to be this piece that nobody seems to give any respect to. I mean, think about this. In 2022, he had 28 homers, drove in 87 runs. Last year, 26 homers, 83, 260 or better batting average in both of those years, right? Why does he get no respect? I don't understand this. And I get it, kind of like Justin Turner. He was a utility guy that eventually worked his way into everyday at-bats and eventually became a useful piece. But Drury's another guy that I want to draft being undervalued. More FST when we return on SportsGrid.
Cinderella run in March Madness, which is what we love out of the NCAA tournament. Indiana State should be in the big dance. I hope the selection committee follows.
Depending on what bracket they end up on, they could really make a strong case to win the national championship. Hence why their odds keep getting shorter, shorter, and shorter.
Only on SportsGrid.
Unlike the last one, I don't think these managers are going to sign up for a 1-1 draw. I think the Spurs know they need to win this one. They need the full 3 points to try to get into Champions League position.
But generally speaking, I find Klopp and Liverpool's approach to be much more effective, which is you disrupt those patterns of play, you get in the middle of those triangles, and you put them on the back foot.
Pro League Soccer, powered by Marca. Only on SportsGrid.
I'm sitting in this chair last year talking, everyone's talking about how the Mets have won the offseason and all these signings and all these players are brought in. And then, you have to deal with, injuries like I think I've never seen before.
That they're really going to try to upgrade some defensively in the outfield and with Bader. And there's a lot of good things there, but the depth is what's going to be important because not everybody's going to hold up.
Newswire. Only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
All right, welcome back into FST Fantasy Sports today. Matt and Joe with you here, talking everything you need to know to dominate the baseball world, not just fantasy baseball. How about real life wagering, where it's actually real and it actually matters? And Joe, I have this conversation with people in my life all the time. Everyone we know and everyone out there, has at least one or two revolving accounts, something that your credit card gets hit every single month. Well, having some knowledge on an 162 game season with 30 teams compete is a great way to mitigate some of those bills. If I know that Logan Webb isn't going to walk more than 4 guys and I can put a wager on that, that's going to help me in order to have Netflix so I can watch Mike Tyson and Jake Paul. You get what I'm trying to say. So now it is time, but there it is. There's my logic. That's how my wife does it. Hey, that what we just saved this now equals a week's worth of groceries. She's not wrong. So it's now time to draft or not to draft, because it comes now down to the value of your draft pick. If you don't draft this player, you can draft that player. It's a conversation we always have. Joe likes to name drop, but it's okay because Joe just sat this past week with some of the most notable names in our industry. And they talked about some of the most notable names in the game. And I really want to hear, Joe, what those meetings were like, what this conversation was like. So it's time now to draft or not to draft. I'll let you do your Shakespeare, and you're off.
Well, this is, very much like when we were kids in the 80s, but you don't have to take my word for it. Remember those commercials? Those are a good time. Like, the more you know, I feel like. But there are a lot of big names that I think we get very comfortable with, and some of them are coming at discounts in 2024 because of injuries, because of age, for a myriad of different reasons. And it is a big question, to draft or not to draft. That is the question. And Mike Trout is the first guy that we're going to discuss, because you are getting the biggest discount we've seen on Mike Trout probably in his career. But is it big enough? I asked Scott Pianowski of Yahoo, who came on my show this week on our Fantasy Fest, and it was fascinating because he was of the same opinion I was. And whenever I'm thinking something that I feel like is controversial, but somebody that I think is smarter than me, like Pianowski says it too, I start to feel a lot better about those kind of things. And he was saying he's avoiding Trout. He doesn't think it's enough of a discount, especially in head-to-head formats. And I think that is the most astute point. You're looking at Trout at this point as great as he is, right? In season-long roto, yeah, okay. You're going to get probably enough productivity out of him where you can justify it and take the chance that maybe you get for more. But if you look at these projections here, 34 homers, 90 RBI, he's got to play a certain amount of games to get to that level. And Trout just simply hasn't done that. So the most games he's played since 2017 is 140, and that was in 2018. Last few years, 82 games last year, 119 the year before that, 36 the year before that, then the COVID-shortened season of 53, 134 before that. You've seen the stolen bases fall off a cliff. It doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. So you're not getting the steals when it comes to Trout. And he is going to be 32 years old in an Angels lineup that's frankly not very good. So it's not that Mike Trout can't do better than this ADP where he's going in the late 50s, but you're also talking about players right around there like Jazz Chisholm, right? Now, Jazz Chisholm also doesn't play a full season, typically so far, but he is much younger than Mike Trout. Does he have the ability to hit 30 home runs and steal 30 bases? He does. Jazz Chisholm does have that. Mike Trout doesn't have that ability. So in roto formats, these are two players going pretty much back-to-back in ADP. And you have to ask yourself, do I want to go down this Mike Trout well again? Now, it could be great, but Mike Trout might also be this player that we're going to sit back and look at and say, well, it's a smaller peak than we realized. He didn't have that run into his 30s. And if you think about him and Bryce Harper, who kind of came up at the same time, you see Bryce Harper in his 30s now really start launching into this second part of his career in a great situation, being very productive the last few years, even last year, despite the injury in the second half. He came back earlier than anticipated, but in the second half, he really started to look like Bryce Harper again. So it feels like Harper's career at the end of the day is going to be much more impressive from an accumulation standpoint. And then I think you're also looking at the kind of players you have to draft in the same area. And Mike Trout still continues, especially in head-to-head formats where you could miss him for significant periods of the season. It's just really hard to justify that because it's going to put you behind. So Mike Trout is a player that I am really skeptical of this year. I'm probably passing on in most drafts. And Matt, I'm curious to think if, what you think about this here, because it feels like Trout, you're getting a discount, which is really, really tantalizing, but is it enough of a discount for you to jump into the pool?
Tantalizing is a fun word to say and to hear. Listen, unless we are thawing Brendan Fraser out of ice and calling this Encino, man, I don't see how anyone goes into a draft and goes, "Oh, Mike Trout! Oh, yeah!" Not my wife's really big into using Marketplace, and a lot of times she finds things that are beautiful but almost useless. Like, I found a Ferrari. The only problem is it doesn't drive. So it's just going to sit in our driveway, but you got it. It's in this much money. I got it for this one. That's Mike Trout. I understand, but you have to take away what you thought you knew, and you have to wager upon a player that you know them to be today. Forget all of the nostalgia and the bias and the war and the metrics and the hey and the ho. Joe is right to tell you who you can get instead, and also think in your head. We always talk about this for wagering, create your own lines. Start to create your own numbers based off what I know, based off what I've seen, based off what is available to me on the internet. I can ascertain that this player is going to do X, Y, and Z. Do it for yourself. Trust yourself. Don't just listen to talking heads like us, but to the point. Mike Trout going to play 80 games? Mike Trout going to play 130 games? You have to answer that question for yourself. And if so, find other players. Cover the name of the player. We say it all the time. Find other players that are going to play this many games and give you this much production. What are you looking for? You're looking for stolen bases, like Joe said? Well, you're not going to find them here. So to your point, yeah, I think you have to start to look past a lot of these names based off what they're going to do. This next guy I want to talk about, though, a lot of people lay off because he doesn't have a jersey on which to put a name. And I think that we have to be careful about because we hear so many rumors. A week ago, it was the Angels. Now it's the Astros. Let's talk about Blake Snell. What are the experts saying about Blake Snell, Joe?
Look, the experts are saying in the average draft position in NFBC that they're still taking him for the most part, and they're taking him way too high, in my opinion. ADP of 65 overall. He's still like the 19th, 20th pitcher off the board. I'm sorry, but that's a joke. Grayson Rodriguez is at 21. Bobby Miller's at 22. Joe Ryan's at 25. Justin Steele's at 27. Dylan Cease at 28. Joe Musgrove at 29. For me, I am passing. And it's not the first time that we've had this issue, too, with Blake Snell, where he's won a Cy Young and disappointed the next year. He could very well do that again. The walk rate is still very high. The efficiency metrics were off the charts last year. Everything broke his way. So he's looking for a big-time contract. We'll see what he gets. I assume at some point he's going to sign somewhere. But the problem is, Matt, what does that look like? When does he end up pitching? Is he going to pitch in mid-April, late April? I mean, you're already missing 4 to 5 starts potentially to start the year, the later Blake Snell signs. I think that's something that is not being cooked into the ADP enough right now.
Well, a lot of the ADPs, as you mentioned, it's polling, and a lot of it does have to change now as the news comes out. But Snell did throw for a bunch of teams, and the one consensus that came out from all the executives that he looked ready. So he's doing his work on his own, which is going to start a much different conversation. We're going to see this a lot with older tenured players where they realize, look, they don't have to have break the bank kind of spring out there. They also don't have to show up in April or May. They show up in June and do what they do. Freddie Freemans of the world are a lost art. You can see more Julio Rodriguez's of the world. They disappear for April and May, months at a time, but that's baseball. Now, this next pitcher, we talked about Snell going to Houston, which makes him much more interesting than if he went to the Angels, in my opinion. But Justin Verlander, I think he's got a brand new arm, but now all of a sudden there are some questions. Your thoughts?
Look, he's getting closer to facing live hitters, so that's a good thing. So we're getting he's on the right path. At 128, I'm listening, and that's where he is right now. He's a 36 pitcher off the board, but I'd rather take Michael King. I'd rather probably take Bailey Ober. Those are some of the names going right around there that I probably still prefer. But if those guys were off the board, I think Verlander is someone that I do think you're getting enough of a discount. It's a good enough team. As you said, a newer arm at the very least, but he's still a 40-year-old pitcher at the end of the day. To me, this is more of a discount that I can actually draft. So I'm not drafting the first two guys we talked about right now in their current ADP, but Verlander at his, I'm willing to take shots depending on who else is on the board at starting pitcher. I think Verlander is a 3 or a 4. Makes a lot more sense of a roll of the dice for me.
All right. Speaking of a roll of the dice, that is what this next organization is going to have to do. And we have a couple of minutes. I'm going to give you 2 from the same team. And I almost ranted, but I'm going to let you. So the first pitcher we're going to talk about, I think has bounce back potential. I really do. And I think depending on where you get him, and you'll tell us the players around this pitcher, I think could be a value. And then the next pitcher, everything has to change now. The conversation has to completely change. But I'll let you talk about what the New York Yankees need to do with Carlos Rodon and Garrett Cole.
Well, they need Carlos Rodon in the worst way to be Carlos Rodon of a couple years ago. The projections here, Again, 10 wins, 3.99 ERA. Like, this is a guy that has the opportunity to, if you go back and look, just dominate in terms of strikeouts. But again, it's the innings, it's the track record. None of it's there to support that this is a good investment still. And you are getting an extreme discount on Carlos Rodon. Is it enough? That is the question we keep asking ourselves. I think it's right on that borderline. I would love to see him have a good start here coming out of spring. Spring doesn't mean a whole lot for a lot of guys, but again, Rodon, I think it means a little bit more because he didn't pitch much last year. When he did, he was terrible. And Garrett Cole, again, I'm not getting enough of a discount currently. I have him at SP 50. He's already plummeted in ADP. It's going to continue to plummet. I'm just being pessimistic when it comes to Garrett Cole and his ability to pitch at all in 2024. If he does, great, and it could be a pick that wins you your league, but I don't think it's far enough away that I'm going to pass on guys like Joe Musgrove and Justin Steele to take Garrett Cole at this point, because I think that looming question of does he pitch at all in 2024 is just too big of a question. And just to circle back on Mike Trout for a second, and no, it's a sad set of circumstances to maybe say this, but there's a chance we look back on Mike Trout's career here, if things don't go well for him these next few years, that it's much more of a Ryan Braun, Albert Bell sort of career where he was just great, but not for a long enough period of time where you're going to compare him to the Griffeys of the world. So just marinate on that on the break. We come back, we're going to take a look at the American League Central, preview them for fantasy right here on FST.
Cinderella run in March Madness, which is what we love out of the NCAA tournament. Indiana State should be in the big dance. I hope the selection committee follows.
Depending on what bracket they end up on, they could really make a strong case to win the national championship. Hence why their odds keep getting shorter, shorter, and shorter.
Only on SportsGrid.
Unlike the last one, I don't think these managers are going to sign up for a 1-1 draw. I think the Spurs know they need to win this one. They need the full 3 points to try to get into Champions League position.
But generally speaking, I find Klopp and Liverpool's approach to be much more effective, which is you disrupt those patterns of play, you get in the middle of those triangles, and you put them on the back foot.
Pro League Soccer, powered by Marca. Only on SportsGrid.
I'm sitting in this chair last year talking, everyone's talking about how the Mets have won the offseason and all these signings and all these players are brought in. And then, you have to deal with, injuries like I think I've never seen before.
That they're really going to try to upgrade some defensively in the outfield and with Bader. And there's a lot of good things there, but the depth is what's going to be important because not everybody's going to hold up.
Newswire. Only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
All right, welcome back into FST Fantasy Sports today. Matt and Joe with you here, giving you everything you need in order to dominate the upcoming baseball season. Any way you which way you choose to make your money, we've got you covered. So I really liked, even as a kid, when you'd get team previews. I remember growing up in the New York area in the newspaper, you'd get those great team previews, and you'd have the lineups and the pictures of the guys. And man, I'd sit with my dad for hours. I'd pin that thing up to my wall. It was just the greatest thing in the world. We have the same feelings. Now it's just digitally. So let's dive into the American League Central. And Joe, I often joke about going discount shopping at a place called Jamaica Avenue where I grew up for the high-end malls. The AL Central is a fantasy Jamaica Avenue because you can get a ton of different players off of different teams that most people in your leagues, depending on what type of leagues you're in, aren't going to pay attention to because it's the AL Central. I mean, you want to talk small market, you want to talk nobody. Who's Parker Meadows? Go find 100 baseball fans and say quickly, who's Parker Meadows? Where does he play? And they'll be like, oh, dang. So let's talk. Let's talk the Guardians. Everyone knows Jose Ramirez. The question is, who's going to hit for them? I still think their pitching is very good. Their bullpen is solid. Joe, take it away on let's start the AL Central preview with the Guardians.
Cleveland was a rough offense last year. And I think what you're looking for is improvement. And I think the improvement is there. You see the Naylor brothers, possibly hitting back-to-back in this lineup. But Josh Naylor is the one to keep an eye on. I've mentioned him on the show before. This is a player that can, he almost drove in 100 runs last year and didn't play a full season. So he is great with runners in scoring position. Jose Ramirez, we know, is an MVP caliber talent, right? So can Stephen Kwan continue to make contact at that high rate? That's a question I think we can all agree. The answer is yes. Andres Jimenez hitting 2 in this lineup. Another fascinating piece. A guy that can give you, 15 homers and steal 30 bases for you very late. The average is going to fall behind a little bit, but I think there's another gear in Jimenez too that you might see him take a step forward, especially where he's hitting in the batting order this year. But the first 4 here of Kwan, Jimenez, Ramirez, and Naylor is all very good grouping here. The second part of this lineup is a little suspect. You see guys like Miles Straw, a speed guy, doesn't make a lot of contact there necessarily, not a lot of power. Ramon Laureano, I don't know if we're going to get out of him, but help is on the way, much like Miss Doubtfire said years ago. Help is on the way, dear. And I think it's Chase DeLauder, who is the young outfielder they have coming through in their system, who's had a terrific spring. You could see him sooner than later. And if DeLauder comes up and hits right away, that would change the dynamic of this lineup. Now, would I like to see, somebody like JD Martinez sign here? Yes. If I'm the Cleveland Guardians, JD Martinez would drop right in the middle of this order and all of a sudden lengthen it and be fantastic. And that would be a great signing for them. I just don't think they're going to do that. Doesn't seem like that's going to be the thing. And I'm not worried about JD Martinez because he's a hitter. I'm worried about the pitchers who sign late, not the hitters. The hitters will be okay. The rotation, Bieber said he's healthier than he's been in a while. He feels really good. The velocity is returning this spring. That's a good thing. Gavin Williams' health is a little bit in question right now. Tanner Bybee, Bieber, those are the 2 guys that I'm targeting out of this rotation. Unfortunately, they've had some other guys too that have not quite made it through. Espino, the young pitcher that they have, Espino, he's going to miss all 2024, so you're not going to see him this year. McKenzie, big question marks about him. So really you need Bieber and Bybee to be the top of this rotation. I think they're both up for it. Bybee was very impressive in his first run with the Guardians last year. And if Shane Bieber can regain his form, he becomes a really interesting bounce-back candidate in 2024. So don't sleep on the Guardians. The Guardians have something to give here, and they might be able to finally turn that lineup around in 2024.
Yeah, and you can't sleep on a team that has a good bullpen. Remember, we're going to move into this season looking to wager on those teams that can play the 6 and 7 inning baseball. And I think that they'll play unders with Cleveland. If they can keep things close, they'll be one of those teams. All right, let's move on to the Royals here. Joe, you're the first one on my radar to put Michael Garcia onto the world's radar. He will lead off for this team. Witt Jr. will be in between him, and then Pasquantino is going to be healthy. Let's talk about this ball club here, the Royals. Honestly, I think the problem with this team is going to be the length of their rotation and then their bullpen, but take it away.
Well, it is. If you want to start with the rotation here, you can, because Lugo and Waka coming off great years with the Padres, and now all of a sudden they're both in Kansas City. Now, some checkered spring performances so far from them. But Cole Reagans, Brady Singer, if you can get Waka and Lugo to give you anything close to what they gave the Padres last year, this is a really interesting team that could actually be problematic. I think, for a lot, and I think would be one of my favorite early underdog teams to start the year. You could see this being the 2024 version of what the Pirates were last year, where they were kind of sneaking up on teams and people weren't really ready for them. They have a superstar in Bobby Witt at the top of this order. Garcia going from the 9 spot to the 1 spot, huge for his run scored. He's in a position now that if he, with his speed to, possibly cross over to 30 stolen bases, score 100 runs on this team, I think that's very possible for Garcia. And you're getting him super late in drafts. Again, way post 200, maybe even post 250 in some drafts. So Bobby Witt, Pasquantino, Perez, and Garcia at the top, good. Melendez, again, power, but the batting average is going to hurt you. Renfroe, it seems like a player that's just kind of hanging on at this point. And then the rest of his batting order towards the end is not thrilling, but Kansas City could be a team that I think is a little better than people realize out of the gate. Sal Perez, another player that I think people don't pay enough attention to and aren't valuing enough. I've seen him drop in a lot of drafts, but he's a very steady 25 home run catcher.
Sure.
And you know exactly what you're getting from him. So again, a lot of this has to do with the rotation and how good Cole Reagans can be and Brady Singer can be. And if those guys can step up and you get some contributions from the veterans, and all of a sudden the Royals might be a plucky little upstarts club who's starting to turn things around. And that's not the only team in this division starting to turn things around too. All of a sudden the AL Central is starting to get healthy again.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I say it's a fun division to watch, to wager upon, and to jump on in fantasy drafts. Let's go to the Detroit Tigers, who have been knocking on the door of relevancy for quite some time, and now it looks like here they come. A lot of young names. I like that Mark Canha has come over to be dropped right in the middle of this lineup because, again, when we're talking about Jeimer Candelario, I always think that veteran presence amongst these young, upcoming teams, it really is important. It's going to be the pitching staff, though. A guy like Jack Flaherty right in the middle here. I'm a Cardinal fan, so I can tell you, Tigers fans, I don't know. Joe?
Well, I think if you're a Tiger fan, what you're starting to see is the fruits of being terrible for so long. And I think that's been the hardest thing as a Tiger fan. You're waiting to see the Torkelsons be good. You're waiting to see all these number one picks that they've had turn into something that you see on the major league level you can get excited about. And Torkelson had a rough start to 2023. And we did we do our buy low, sell high swing. And how much did I talk about Spencer Torkelson last year in about June of buy this guy? The power's there. You just got to keep buying in until he gets comfortable. And guess what? Second half was tremendous for Torkelson. He was great. Riley Green flashed you some brilliance. And just when he was starting to get going, unfortunately, injury derailed his 2023 season. So those two guys in the 2 and 3 spot are really intriguing to me this year. Again, people continue to sleep on these guys who are not on good teams because, frankly, they're just not very public players. But Torkelson and Riley Green in particular, Kerry Carpenter at DH, all three of those guys are worthy. Then you've got some intriguing other young players coming through. Colt Keith, young second baseman, good hard hit rate, a player that you like a lot. You mentioned, people don't know who Parker Meadows is. Well, they might find out pretty soon. This is another player too where things are starting to go in the right direction for him, starting to make some good adjustments at AAA last year. Again, a player hit 250, but he had 19 home runs last year in 114 games. So the power's starting to develop. He'll be 24 years old this year. You're also looking at, do you get anything out of Javier Baez? I would venture to say no, because I think I've been around long enough to say that this was a player that was highly overrated, got a contract he did not really deserve necessarily. And this is the problem if you're the Tigers. You can't miss on deals like this. Why they decided to spend their money this way, I'll never understand. And then the Tigers pitching staff, intriguing, because Tariq Skubal, brilliant, not good, brilliant for 100 innings last year. Can he extend that number to 165 to 170 and be just as brilliant? That's a big question. So far, people are willing to pay the price to say yes on that answer. Kenta Maeda, another guy, flies under the radar. Good, solid pitcher. If you're looking for, I would say, depth in your fantasy rotation, Maeda's a guy that I would be very excited to draft. Flaherty, I don't know what you're going to get out of him, but Casey Mize had a really good start this week. Casey Mize, Matt Manning, there were a bunch of guys that were coming through the system that were supposed to be really good, and Mize was supposed to be the best of all of them. If he can finally get back on track after a few years of being injured and just being disappointing, that would be a huge boost to this Tigers rotation. But Skubal's clearly that guy. He's going in the top 15 pitchers right now. Maeda, a really good value play. And if you're looking to take a shot late or maybe buy low in Dynasty, Casey Mize is an interesting one too, because so far the spring has been kind to him.
All right. I like it. All right. I like where we are here, the pregnant pause, because Joe and I agree that there are two teams in the American League that offer a great profitability, and this is one of them. at the top of the lineup is a player that Joe is very excited about. I really like what they have at the bottom of the lineup, and the kid Matt Wallner, he's a lefty, he's got some pop, he should play left field. They have Royce Lewis as well. As most of you know, I'm talking about the Minnesota Twins. Joe, this pitching staff, I think this pitching staff, people are sleeping on it. I think the bullpen people are sleeping on, even in the bullpen, in the minors. Woods Richardson is another kid that's going to come up here. So it does not quit for these Minnesota Twins. Take it away.
It doesn't. I love the rotation here. Pablo Lopez at the top was fantastic last year. Joe Ryan got off to a good start. Some injuries. Second half fell off a little bit. He's looked really good this spring. Bailey Ober, one of my favorite pitchers to be drafting later. Again, the guy's going as a number 4 starter. They could have number 2 starter potential. Paddock and Desclafani, we'll see what we get out of those guys. But Louis Varland's around too. Mm-hmm. There's opportunities in this pitching staff that, again, if injury does strike, they're not bereft of options, and that's a good thing. Now, Paddock's still a 2-pitch pitcher, so I'm a little skeptical there. However, once upon a time, this was a very good young pitcher that people were very high on, had some moments at the major league level, but it's the offense I'm excited about with the Twins. Edouard Julien hitting at the top of this order. We're going to talk about more about him in the second half here. A guy with a very high on base percentage. That's who you want at the top of this order. I keep comparing him to Jose Vidro because I think that's what he's going to be. Carlos Correa, you're going to have injuries, but Royce Lewis is the guy that really could put the Twins into the next stratosphere. Again, more name dropping here. Steve Gardner from USA Today was also on our Fantasy Fest. I gave him opportunity to make some bold predictions on the show, and one of them was Royce Lewis for MVP. And I don't think that's crazy. Royce Lewis is an ADP of 56 overall. Mike Trout an ADP of 58. And if you give me the opportunity, I'm going to take Royce Lewis every single time in 2024. For better, for worse, for right or for wrong, because the upside of Royce Lewis at this point, I think, outweighs the upside of what Mike Trout is at this stage in his career. It could be wrong at the end of the day, but Royce Lewis is a player that has that potential right now to hit for a high batting average in the 300s, to hit you 25, 30 home runs, to steal some bases, to drive in 90 runs or more, and to score 90 runs or more. The rest of this lineup, they need Kepler to do something with Kirilloff. Finally, these guys have to really deliver. They signed veteran Carlos Santana. Matt Wallner, an interesting late piece too. You're looking for some outfield depth. But Byron Buxton's the big enigma. But what else is new? Byron Buxton is always the enigma every single season. Byron Buxton has the potential to be a fantastic superstar player. Another guy, their injuries just never let him do that. So I'm going to continue to fade away from Byron Buxton. But again, Royce Lewis is the piece here that I really want.
Well, however you like to wager. You like total base props, the Twins have you covered. You like K props, Twins have you covered. First threes, first fives, even overs, the Twins have you covered. And the reason I use that as a segue, because this next team, the White Sox, could be the other way. We could be really finding, now that Dylan Cease is gone, we could be finding some interesting wagering options here with these White Sox. Give me 45 seconds on this before the break.
Whatever the win total is, folks, bet the under. Bet the under. Eloy Jimenez on a contract year. Look, Eloy Jimenez is intriguing because he's going very late. He's still got 30 home run potential. He could be that bat that gets traded to Seattle. I'm telling you, that's the kind of bat that I can see going there and making an impact. So remember I said it. Let's clip this. Drew Thorpe, really interesting. I'm running away from this rotation. Luis Robert, brilliant. But the White Sox, under. That's where we're going. Now, speaking of numbers, the stat of the day when we return right here on SportsGrid. Don't go anywhere. I love this one.
Cinderella run in March Madness, which is what we love out of the NCAA tournament. Indiana State should be in the big dance. I hope the selection committee follows.
Depending on what bracket they end up on, they could really make a strong case to win the national championship. Hence why their odds keep getting shorter, shorter, and shorter.
Only on SportsGrid.
unlike the last one, I don't think these managers are going to sign up for a 1-1 draw. I think the Spurs know they need to win this one. They need the full 3 points to try to get into Champions League position.
But generally speaking, I find Klopp and Liverpool's approach to be much more effective, which is you disrupt those patterns of play, you get in the middle of those triangles, and you put them on the back foot.
Pro League Soccer, powered by Marca. Only on SportsGrid.
I'm sitting in this chair last year talking, everyone's talking about how the Mets have won the offseason and all these signings and all these players are brought in. And then, you have to deal with, injuries like I think I've never seen before.
That they're really going to try to upgrade some defensively in the outfield and with Bader. And there's a lot of good things there, but the depth is what's going to be important because not everybody's going to hold up.
Newswire. Only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
All right, welcome back into FST. Matt and Joe with you here. Just want you to know that we talk about baseball, but we also talk about other things. Right before the break, in my ear, I have a little monitor, and I hear Joe ranting about how it's 2024 and how you just can't have a mustache and da-da-da-da. Joe, I got to tell you, man, you live in my head at all times, whether it be baseball, whether it be raising my kids. You're an American treasure. You need to be protected at all costs. It's time for stat of the day. I've got no segue. The floor is yours.
Well, I have to have a mustache on opening day because our YouTube grew so much. We made a bet with our watchers at FP that if we had 17,000 subs, that we would wear mustaches on the show opening day. So there you go. So that's going to happen.
Grow it. Don't wear it. Grow it and keep it for the show.
It's like 3
keep
hours
it for our
for
show
me,
too.
Mustache.
We get to see it.
I don't know about that. I don't know if it's going to last a couple days. That's a question. Now, one thing that's been very durable, see that segue? Dylan Cease. Since the day that Dylan Cease became a part of the rotation in Major League Baseball 4.5 years ago, not a single pitcher has had more starts than Dylan Cease. That's a fun fact there for the San Diego Padres to now get this very durable starter. So although the Padres don't have Juan Soto anymore, they've still got Machado. They've still got Tatis. They've still got Bogarts. They've still got Kim. They've still got a lot of pieces. And this rotation is Musgrove, Darvish, King, and now Cease too. Let me tell you, the Padres might be a little bit more annoying than people realize, and maybe without as much pressure on them, with all the pressure on the Dodgers, be a little bit more intriguing than people realize. I'm just saying, don't sleep on the San Diego Padres. This was a big move. Now, they did move some pieces. Again, Drew Thorpe going to the other side. A really good young arm. People thought he was going to start in the rotation for the Padres. I don't know if he's going to start in the rotation for the White Sox, but at some point sooner than later, you're going to see him, and he's going to be another big piece. But Padres could be really intriguing. Hour 1 is in the books for FST, but in Hour 2, we're going to kick things off with a little NFL because in case you missed it, a lot of guys have some new addresses in the NFL, and we're going to tell you about that fantasy impact when we return for Hour 2, which starts right now.